Welcome back, folks, to another episode of Fear Frank Reviews. Now, I gotta be honest, the last film I did, Dragon Ball Z Battle of the Gods, or Battle of Gods. Yeah, I keep forgetting there was no the in it. Whatever. It was actually a really good movie. So does that mean I'm going to continue on with the Dragon Ball franchise? Well, yes, but not today. Today I'm going to do a 5 film series at this point. Yes, a film. Yes, I'm going to do 5 films today. Well, not 5 films. Just this week, I'm going to do 5 movies in a row. Why 5 movies, you may ask? Well, mainly to make up for the fact that I slacked off for 2 months, because of the Garbage Pail Kids movie. So what's today's film? Well, I've done slasher films, I've done horror films, but there was one particular character I only done maybe twice, and I think it's about time I give the character it's about time I give the character his due. Today we're going to look at A Nightmare on Elm Street. That's right, folks. That is right. I'm going to finally do Freddy Krueger's movies, but just for just for the sake of my sanity, I'm not going to do all of them. For example, I already did Freddy versus Jason, and I already did the remake. And technically, Freddy versus Jason was a crossover film, so basically, that was also a Jason film, not just a Freddy film. All right. So the collection I have here, I'm actually only going to do the first 5 films, which of course is the first one, the second one, the third film, the fourth film, and the fifth film. I'm not going to do the sixth or the seventh film because those films were made in the 90s. So I'm only going to focus mainly on the 80s films because that's where Nightmare on Elm Street was actually big back then. It was the 1980s. Now, a couple other things I want to mention too. The idea that in the remake where Freddy Krueger actually molested the kids when they were younger, that was already creepy enough. That was beyond the point of creepy, and it was a disgusting twist that a lot of people really were pissed off with. And yeah, Wes Craven, even Robert Englund, who originally played Freddy, actually didn't like that at all whatsoever. Now, here's a fun fact. Originally, in the original concept of the original film, the molestation part was actually originally part of his character trait, but Wes decided to remove it and just make him just a child murderer instead. That he just hunted down the kids, scaring them to half to death before killing them is already creepy enough as it is. Hmm. So, adding the whole molestation part, yeah, Wes Craven was very smart to remove that feature because let's face it, it's bad enough knowing we have a child killer on our hands. So, what can be said about the first movie? Well, it's an iconic horror film, number one, and we have a short cast of people to work with. And ironically, this is also Johnny Depp's first movie. No, seriously, I mean, I looked at Johnny Depp's filmography. This is the first film he starred in. Yeah, before he actually got really. Now, I know Johnny Depp got his films career started in the 1980s, and he's done a few films here and there back then. But the one thing that really took his career off was actually 21 Jump Street, the TV show. And if you haven't watched that show, you really need to watch it. I mean, seriously. There's also a reference that was actually in season 2 that okay, how's the reference go? Apparently, there was a movie star that Johnny Depp's character and his partner actually had to keep an eye on because they were bodyguarding him, and they actually made a joke reference saying that the guy was originally in a horror film. One of his starting film was actually he was one of the victims in a horror film with an iconic kill scene. Yeah, referencing this movie. So let's begin. The movie centers around Nancy Thompson, Glenn, played by Johnny Depp, Rob, well, actually his name is Rod, and of course Tina. All right, the whole movie starts off with Tina actually having a nightmare and escaping from Freddy Krueger. she meets up with Tina. She meets up with Nancy and Glenn, and they ask if they all had nightmares too. But apparently, they all did. The crazy thing is, when they all talk about nightmares, they all realize. Well, here's the thing. This is happening a little bit later. Ironically, it turns out Nancy and Tina actually had the same nightmare about the same guy. Hmm, very fascinating. So Rod comes over, and well, he and Tina actually shag up. And the funniest thing is, it's what Johnny Depp says. So Johnny Depp actually gets one of the most funniest lines in the movie. I forgot what it was already, but it's pretty funny when you think about it. But when Tina and Rod both go to sleep, Tina actually has another nightmare about Freddy Krueger. And yeah, Freddy comes in and, well, kills her in one of the most iconic film scenes where where he claws her chest wide open and he drags her all the way up all the way up the ceiling in a very unique shot. But to be fair, how is that scene done? Well, here's one thing I like about this. Well, there's one thing I have to say. I may not be a huge fan of this film series, but the one thing I do like about this film series is how they did the films. They had they had minimum resources, they had low budget, but they used everything on practical effects. And to be fair, the execution isn't actually half that bad. Yeah. I mean, there's even this one sequence where before Tina gets killed, she actually rips Freddy's face off, and it actually reveals a skeleton, like a skeleton face that's actually just sticking his tongue out at her, where with the eyes bulging out, like. Okay, you know how that scene. Okay, we all know how that scene went. Like, obviously, the scene was done originally with Robert Englund on top of her, on top of Tina's actress, and then they switch over to a prop head of Freddy Krueger, and it just comes right off. You know, I gotta admit, it's ridiculous and silly, but in this film with the dark atmosphere, it actually works. Yeah, none of that CG crap. No, this shit was all practical. Works. Yeah. So yeah, everybody assumes that Rod actually had killed Tina. So Nancy actually wants to go into school the next day, where Rod actually meets up with her. But it turns out that the police actually kept an eye on Nancy because, well, Nancy's father is the chief of police, and they arrest Rod afterwards. Tina Tina's death really hit Nancy really hard, and she sees Tina everywhere, and she basically Nancy is going in and out of dreaming right now. And we get a surreal nightmare sequence with her and Nancy actually following a trail of blood and a body bag going right down the hallway, where she meets Freddy Krueger. There's also a girl she bumps into in the hallway, but it turns out it's actually some random girl wearing Freddy's outfit. And of course, Robert Englund dubbed in the lines too. It's like, Nancy, no running in the hall. You know what? Like I said, I am not a huge fan of Freddy Krueger, but when Robert Englund plays the role, I expect him to be like that. Seriously. It's one of his iconic roles, for Christ's sake. So, yeah, I have no. So, when it comes down to it, I don't hate Robert Englund or his character that much. In fact, I just get joy out of watching these films because they're iconic. Iconic horror films. I mean, it's just as iconic as that giant T Rex poster I have back there that looks like the T Rex from Jurassic Park, but it's not really the T Rex from Jurassic Park. No, it's a different company that made this poster. Yeah, not bad. But as for the but as for those but the posters around it, I created those. Yeah. Anyway, Nancy wakes up from the dream, and she also notices something too. She actually burned her hand to wake. She burned her arm to wake up, and yeah, the burn mark is still there. So clearly, if you get hurt in these dreams with Freddy Krueger, you get hurt in real life. Oh dear. Nancy actually goes to talk to Rod, and he actually admits he had a nightmare about Freddy Krueger. But the thing is, they don't know who he is yet. And of course, Glenn basically tries to support Nancy, so she goes right to dream. So Nancy tries to dream or something, but here's the thing: she wants to see. She's doing a couple of experiments with dreaming, and of course, Glenn, being a dumbass, is actually sleeping alongside of her. But for some reason, he's not having nightmares, which is weird. It doesn't make any sense. Apparently, he may actually drift in and out of dreaming or something, but it doesn't make sense. Regardless, it's never explained in this version. When I say version, I'll explain why later. So, so Nancy actually sees that Freddy is about to go kill Rod. So Nancy and Glenn actually both wake up, and they head and he goes straight down to the police station. to actually talk to Rod, where her father doesn't want them to talk to her, but eventually she just convinces her father she just needs to see him to make sure he's okay. And well, okay, Mr. Thompson disagreeingly goes down with them. At this point, we see that Freddy is actually using his dreaming powers to actually strangle Rod with his cell blanket. So yeah, he strangles him and hangs him, and they just show up in time to see him get hanged. So at the funeral, so at the funeral, Nancy tells her mother that tells her mother and father she's describing Freddy Krueger, and he doesn't want to hear about it, though, meaning that there's something going on there. Now, what is it that's going on there? I'll get to that a little later, which it'll be about what 5 minutes or so. So Nancy is actually taken to a dream psychologist to actually study her dreaming patterns, and she has a nightmare which we don't see. But when she wakes up, she has a streamline of gray hair. And before that sequence, we actually get the famous bathtub sequence, where Freddy actually takes his hand out, and is about to do something to Nancy, but he goes back under. But then he drags her underwater, where her stunt double almost got killed. How do I know it's her stunt double? Well, but for one thing, I've seen the actress who played. Well, okay, I'm pretty sure most of you out there have probably seen the actress who played Nancy nude at one point. Yeah, if you watch the actress during the sequence and look at Nancy's character, yeah, it doesn't look like Nancy at all. Well, figure wise, you can probably tell it's not really her; it's her stunt double. Just wanted to point that out. Shut up. Anyway, but anyway, at the psychiatrist, she actually see that not only she have a great streak of hair, but guess what she did? She pulled out Freddy's hat. So that's where she realized she could actually take things out of the dream, or pieces of him in the dream. That's pretty unique. Pretty interesting to say the least. So, anyway, Nancy's mother, I gotta be honest, is a complete drunk. And of course, Glenn is actually starting to notice that Nancy's starting to go crazy, but she's going crazy because of the fact that people are dying around her because of this nightmare guy, and Glenn refuses to actually accept it, but eventually he comes around to it, though. Too bad his parents don't come around to it. But then we get something from Nancy's mother. She basically bars all the doors, she bars all the windows in the house, and actually has a new lock system on the doors. That way Nancy can't get in or out. Gee, I wonder if that's going to come back and bite her in the ass. It does. It does. Anyway, her mother takes her down to the basement where she actually opens up the furnace and she says, "This used to be Freddy Krueger's. Fred Krueger was actually a child murderer who killed 20 kids, and this used to be his house. In fact, I kept a souvenir." She pulls out Freddy's glove, which was in the furnace the entire time. So yeah, not only did Freddy actually live in the same house as them, but apparently he also burned up some of the bodies of the children within the boiler itself, which is pretty fucked up to say the least. But she goes on to explain that the legal system basically screwed up and Freddy gets off scot free. And then the parents of Elm Street got fed up. They took matters in their own hands and they burned them alive with Molotov cocktails. So now Freddy's back for revenge. That's just stupid. So Nancy actually tells Glenn that she wants him to come, she's going to have him come over, but unfortunately, it doesn't work out in the end. Why? Mainly because of the fact that one, Glenn falls asleep, and well, for one thing, Glenn's parents actually unhook the phone. That way, Nancy can't call at all whatsoever. And Nancy's mom knocks the door on the and hides the key away from Nancy. And what happens? Well, we get the most iconic kill in the and one of the most iconic kills in the franchise. Freddy grabs Glenn and drags him into the bed, and a few seconds later, blood starts shooting out of the bed. If you're wondering how that sequence was done, obviously the set was actually upside down. Obviously, they actually made the set go upside down. They actually revolved the set upside down. That way, they had the blood shooting outwards. And some crew members actually got electrocuted because apparently because the room tilted in the wrong direction, hence why there's some blood actually going upwards. It's going sideways in some areas too, which is real messed up. Anyway, Glenn's parents see it. They are beyond freaked out and mortified. So Mr. Thompson and the police force are already there trying to do the thing. Nancy's extremely pissed off, so she makes amends with her mother and goes to sleep and go after Freddy Krueger. But not before she home alones the entire house. What do I mean by home alone? She sets up traps all over the house for Freddy Krueger. Actually, this is before home. This is actually a few years before Home Alone, so pre-Home Alone, I think. I'm gonna make a guess. I'm gonna have to do the Home Alone film sooner or later. But all joking aside, Freddy Krueger actually meets up with Nancy in her dream, and before she was able to wake up, she actually tackles him to the ground, and she wakes up. And the whole thing was just a dream, and the movie ends. Just kidding. No, she thinks that she was actually crazy, but nope. Freddy pops up right beside her and tries to claw her, and he goes through several of the Home Alone style traps. Oh, wait a second. This is literally before Home Alone. So he goes through some of Nancy's traps, and Nancy's trying to get the police to actually come by over. And of course, one deputy is being kind of a dumbass about the whole thing. At some point, the fight moves down to the basement where Nancy actually douses Freddy with gasoline and then sets him on fire. The police finally come in, but Freddy makes his way all the way upstairs where they actually go after him, where Nancy and her father go after him, and he kills Nancy's mother while she's asleep. But here's the thing. But here's when it gets a little weird. This sequence is a little weird, and it's kind of surreal dream sequence, but it makes no sense in my opinion. But Mr. Thompson throws a blanket onto both of them to put the fire out, and when he removes the blanket, we see a pit within the bed itself, and Nancy's mom's corpse is hovering over it, goes down, and the bed just reforms itself. They're just both in shock to see that just happened. So, yeah, it's kind of a weird sequence. Nobody knows how the hell that actually worked, but it doesn't make any sense. Anyway, uh, Mr. Thompson actually leaves Nancy alone, and the door slams behind him. But it wasn't really him; it was Freddy. Nancy actually just commits to herself that the whole thing is not even real at all; it's just a dream, and she goes into full commitment on it. While Freddy comes out of the bed, and he's not looking too good, considering the fact he got fucked up by Nancy. And Nancy just goes on a rant saying that all this is just a dream. You're not even real. You're just a figment of an imagination. She turns around to him and says, "You're nothing but shit," and turns right back up. So she's basically just ignoring him at this point. She doesn't see him as a threat anymore. She's just ignoring him. Freddy, extremely pissed off, tries to slash her, but he fades out of existence. And that's kind of interesting to know that nobody else has actually done this in the film series. Anyway, she goes through the door. Everybody's alive and everything. Her friends are alive. Her mom's alive. She gets to the car with her friends. Then the car closes in, locks everybody in, drives off. And the car is colored like Freddy Krueger. While Freddy actually grabs Nancy's mom through the door window and drags her in, killing her instantly. The end. Okay, that's just kind of an ambiguous ending. Starting to say, was the whole thing a dream? Was the whole thing a nightmare? Was any of it real? It's an ambiguous ending. And I think originally it was supposed to be left open ended, but, well, that was until the sequel came out. Anyway, that was A Nightmare on Elm Street. And, The Nightmare on Elm Street? Nightmare on Elm Street? Here's something funny. The actual title name is called A Nightmare on Elm Street. Yeah, you see that? The A is literally above the I. And the entire film series is called A Nightmare on Elm Street, but yet everybody calls it Nightmare on Elm Street, just ignoring the A. Kind of weird. You know what? Just call it the Elm Street Nightmares, just to keep it short. I mean, that's what I call it nowadays. Anyway, do I recommend this film? Yes, I do. It's actually a classic horror film, and Freddy Krueger became a big household name afterwards. So I do highly recommend this movie for any horror fan out there. You're probably going to enjoy it. You may not enjoy it. You may just straight up hate it. Hey, if you haven't watched this movie, then you're a fool. For one thing, it is way better than the 2010 film, mainly because of the fact that it mostly used practical effects. And fun fact, everybody did not get paid for when this movie was finished. They only got paid after the film was released. Yeah, because it became such a massive hit at the box office that they actually got paid more so than usual. Yeah, so apparently a horror film was a way to go. So much so they made a sequel. That's not exactly Friday the 13th. That's not exactly nightmare material, which is weird. I'll get to that in a minute. But there's something else I got to discuss. Now, there's actually a lot of stuff about this movie that doesn't make any sense. That's because of this. There was actually a director's cut version of this movie at some point. I discussed it with my buddy a few days ago, and it turns out there actually was an extended director's cut version where it's even more strange, and the movie is actually, the tone is a lot more different in that version than in this one. You know, in Freddy versus Jason, how the adults knew that Freddy was actually was going into people's nightmares? They knew about it in this movie too, in the original cut version. And here's something else too: the scene where when Nancy's mother explains to Nancy everything about Freddy Krueger. Here's something else that was cut from the movie. Apparently, Nancy had a sibling. I I saw the scene years ago, but oh yeah, there was a lot of stuff that was cut. There was even the trial sequence, but we don't see Freddy Krueger at all. But still, we only see his hands cuffed, and that was it. But the sequence where Nancy actually had a sibling, it turns out that that one of the kids that was actually killed was Nancy's sibling. And Nancy was probably not even born yet. She was probably, because her mother was probably pregnant at the time. Or maybe she was just too young at the time and she didn't even know about it. Like, just a baby. But yeah, there's a lot of that. And there's also the fact what actually happened to Glenn. You see the whole blood sequence coming out of the bed? Guess what happened in the original sequence? His body literally comes right out from under the bed and just plops dead. So what the fuck did Freddy do? It's hinted at the fact that Freddy actually probably drained him, actually cut him open and drained him of all of his blood and just whatever, or just tossed him into a blood, or just gave him a bloodbath and he drowned. It's unknown what the fuck happens at this point, but all I can tell you is that all that blood definitely did not belong to Glenn because that's a lot of blood. Like seriously, there was like too much blood in that film in that sequence. So, would I recommend the extended cut version? Yeah, kind of. But I recommend watching the original version first, and just to get your perspective on it, though. Well, that's it for A Nightmare on Elm Street. Tune in tomorrow, and I'll take a look at Freddy's Revenge, the gayest film in the franchise. Why did I say gay? Because there's a shitload of gay overtones in this movie, and I didn't even realize until like a few years ago. And honestly, it doesn't feel like a Nightmare on Elm Street film at all. Tune in next time. We'll talk about it.